Namaskar to all the dignitaries that are present at this inaugural of the fourth Global Ayurveda Festival. And it is indeed my honor and pleasure to share a few thoughts with you today. I have been the chief scientist of the World Health Organization now for the past 2 years or so. And it has been a really very challenging and humbling and exciting experience and journey to not only chart a new path, that is the establishment of the science division and the first chief scientist position in WHO. So that in itself has been a huge opportunity. But in addition to that, of course, we had the COVID pandemic in 2020, which is still continuing, and for which the science division played a major role working hand in hand with the emergencies program of WHO, as well as with our technical counterparts, both within the different WHO regional and country offices, but also with our technical counterparts in the ministries of health and public health agencies across the world. And our work has been of such a huge range, from coordinating the epidemiology, the data collection from the countries, analyzing it, making sense of the daily cases and deaths, which has been, of course, varying from region to region, country to country. We have had ups and downs, as all of you are aware. So that itself is a huge exercise. And one of the things that we observed when we do the data collection from countries is that very often we do not get age and sex disaggregated data. And it really highlights the importance of good data collection. And I think it's important for this Global Ayurveda Festival and for the, especially for the scientists, the researchers, the young Ayurveda physicians who are attending this program, to understand the importance of data, of collecting good, strong, high quality data, whatever your field of expertise, whatever the field of medicine may be. Without a solid um, data set to draw your evidence and your conclusions from, it is very, very difficult to make progress in any field. And so with COVID, we were faced with this challenge that in many countries, there are not enough diagnostic tests available at the beginning. And even today, there's a lack of diagnostic kits available in many low income countries. And so we have very sketchy and patchy idea of the extent of the disease. We have seen in many countries, including in India, that the zero prevalence studies that were done at the community level to indicate the extent of infection showed that the infection rates in the community were much, much higher, sometimes tenfold, 25-fold higher, or even more than that, than the reported cases. So while today we say we have 100 and close to 120 million reported cases of COVID-19 and over 2.6 million deaths, these are only the documented and the counted cases, and the real true figures are probably much, much higher. So I wanted to start by making the point about data. The other area, of course, that we've been working on a lot is research and R&D in particular. We convened early in February 2020 the first Global Research and Innovation Forum, bringing together academics, researchers, private and public agencies to identify the knowledge gaps and the research needs. And for COVID-19, of course, there were a lot of knowledge gaps at that point. We did not know much about the virus. It had just been, of course, identified and given a name, the SARS-CoV-2, but we didn't know much about how it behaves and the clinical and its epidemiological manifestations. But we kept on learning very, very fast, because the global community of scientists has really risen to the challenge. I would say the amount of work on this virus is probably much, much, many times higher than the amount of research on all of the, previous viruses put together. In 1 year, the amount of information and knowledge about the structure of the virus, how it spreads, the transmission modes, the how it affects the body. We started off by thinking it's a respiratory virus, and we recognized that it was a multi-system. It could affect all body systems. That it has long-lasting effects. The long COVID, which is seen, in up to 10% of survivors, and in a much higher proportion of survivors who are hospitalized or in the ICU, they suffer from symptoms which go on for many months. Um, we started understanding the immunology of this virus, and we still are understanding. I would say we don't know everything yet. We know that there is innate immune response, particularly in the respiratory mucosa, that plays an important role in the initial immune response to the virus. And then there is the adaptive immunity, which comes in later, which are the antibodies, the neutralizing antibodies, as well as the T cell responses. So both the cell mediated and the humoral immune system play an important role. And it's important to understand how the immunology works and what is the protective immunity, because we need that for development of vaccines as well as therapeutics. What we need to identify, and we still don't have, is a correlate of protection. What is that level of antibody? What is that level of the T cell response? And how do you measure that? How do you standardize it so that you can compare different studies of different vaccine candidates and also look at people who have recovered from natural infection to see how long their immunity will persist. So there are still a lot of questions that need to be answered. Though we have learned so much about the virus, we still need to continue the research. And for this, we convened, as I said, large groups of scientists. We have continued to convene throughout the past 14 months on a daily basis. We have meetings with different expert groups who have been progressing. And some of the things that we have done, that WHO did, particularly the R&D blueprint, which is managed by the Science Division and the Emergencies Program jointly, is on the standards for research into, especially into diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. How do you identify the target product profiles? What are the template and core protocols that can be used for clinical trials? What are the prioritization criteria for certain candidates to be advanced into clinical trials? How do you assess and compare the different products? And then finally, how do you proceed for regulatory approval? What are the terms and conditions for an emergency use listing? And as you know, the WHO has already provided emergency use listing for 3 vaccines, and the Johnson and Johnson vaccine will be very soon, I think today or over the next couple of days. But what you need for this is preparatory work. When there is an emergency, when there's a pandemic, you cannot overnight launch a research program if you have not been prepared for it, if the systems are not geared up for it. And this is where, in countries which already had a very well organized system of research, where they had well functioning networks of research centers, where they had well functioning ethics committees, well functioning central regulatory authority, were able, and of course, funding from government or from other agencies, they were able to start and complete some research studies very quickly and in a very high quality manner. And this is why we believe that investing in research capacity, strengthening all of these elements that you need not only the clinicians, you need epidemiologists, you need statisticians, you need nurses, you need social scientists, you need counselors, you need people who will follow up the patients. It's extremely important to adhere to the highest standards of ethics when we are doing research. And the ethics has to be in the context of the local region, country, or even at the state level. It has to be in the language that the people understand. It has to be ensured that people understand they're participating in research, that they have informed consent that they provide, and that all facilities are provided to the participants of research to ensure that there is no undue harm or any concerns about the safety of the participants. And the safety is not only from the point of view of a new drug or a vaccine, it's also from the point of view of the stigma sometimes that's associated with certain diseases and the response that the communities can have. So investing in research preparedness and investing in research is one of the hallmarks, I think, of a developing country and economy that really believes in knowledge generation and believes in ensuring that all of its programs are based actually on science, based on data, based on evidence, and that there is a constant re-examining of the programs and modifying based on improving gathering of knowledge. And then equally important is the communication of that knowledge. We have seen that in the response to the pandemic, the difference between countries that did well and countries that did not do well, one of the factors was the trust that people had in the messages that were being conveyed and the openness and transparency um, and frequency of communication. And it's not only a question of providing information, it's also a question of listening to people's questions, trying to answer them, and being able to allay their fears, provide reassurance, but always base the information on the data and evidence that is currently available, and acknowledging that this is changing, that this is evolving, and that as new data becomes available, the science is evolving, that this new information will be provided to the public, it will be updated, and it will also inform the policies that you are implementing. I think that is extremely important and is one of the major factors which can make a difference in how the community actually responds to the messages, whether it is to do with adherence to masks or whether it is to do with vaccination. A lot of the response in countries really depends on how how information is conveyed, and to what extent the communities are engaged in those programs. As far as you know, Ayurveda, which is could be considered a traditional medicine, one of the major global fields of traditional medicine, would be offered, from the WHO's point of view, traditional and complementary medicine should be offered as part of an integrated, universal health coverage program and as part of a integrated healthcare delivery in a well-functioning, people-centered health system that balances both curative and preventive services. So, traditional and complementary medicine is an underestimated health resource in many countries. And while its use and benefits are well recognized in the so called lifestyle diseases or non communicable diseases, it would also help a lot in meeting the needs of the aging population and potentially also in improving the quality of life, in boosting the immune system, and in providing an additional um, intervention in the promotion of health and well being. And as you know, the WHO's global program of work, which runs up to 2025, really focuses on healthy lives and well being. So we talk specifically about well being and not only about the absence of disease or the treatment and prevention of diseases. So it's a much more holistic approach to health, which includes everything from preventive and promotive health services to, of course, the diagnostic and curative services, to rehabilitation, to palliation, covering mental health, covering all the risk factors and determinants of disease. And I think Ayurveda also believes in the same type of holistic approach to health. So that way, I think we are very well aligned. The choice of appropriate health services, of course, one part of people centered health systems. So the choices that millions of people make every year to choose between allopathic and other forms should be based on good information as well as high quality health services being provided to people so that they can make an informed decision about which type of medicine that they would like to. And of course, this would vary for different conditions. And for certain conditions, Ayurveda may be the most optimal. For others, clearly allopathy would have its advantages, and one needs to recognize that, and people need to be informed. So, again, the issue of health literacy, it's not one system versus the other system. How can all the systems play an important role, really, in helping the goals of healthy life and well-being for people? We have, of course, different forms of traditional medicine in different parts of the world. We have Ayurveda in South Asia, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, etc. We have the traditional Chinese medicine systems that are prevalent in China and Korea and Japan. And India, of course, has a huge workforce of Ayurveda practitioners as well as practitioners of other traditional medicine. And therefore, there is a potential of utilizing this field towards the attainment of universal health coverage, which is something that India has committed to. Um, in terms of the immune system, as I spoke about a little while ago, you have different arms of the immune system. You have the innate immunity, which is the one that really can be boosted up by different ways in which, um, before you are confronted with a disease or a pathogen, you already have a strong innate immune system, which helps you to actually fight any particular virus or other pathogen. The adaptive immune system, of course, comes in only once the body has already seen a particular pathogen and then starts to react to that. So anything which reduces immunity, and we know the links between the neurocognitive and mental health status as well as the immune systems. This has been something that there's been a lot of research on. And we know that if somebody is severely depressed, even if they may not have any physical ailments, that their immune system would be depressed. We know that many diseases, including diabetes, um, and of course other common infectious diseases, can suppress the immune system either for a short period of time or for a longer period of time. Many drugs can do the same thing, suppressing the immune system. So there are many conditions out there which impact the immune system. And so we need to counter that by seeing what are the forces which can actually strengthen the immune system. So what we need really are these studies to prove that this is feasible. So you need a hypothesis first to study, to test. And the hypothesis could be that a certain intervention boosts the innate immunity and thereby protects you from getting, X or Y infection. That needs to be tested at the community population level in a large, well conducted, randomized clinical trial. Smaller studies, observational studies, case control studies may be good to generate hypotheses, but they are not good enough to prove the case. So you can generate hypotheses by observations by one particular physician or a one hospital observing a certain phenomenon, but then that phenomenon really needs to be tested in a well-designed trial. And as we have seen in COVID, that many drugs that were proposed to have a mode of action and that were thought could be helpful either for treatment or prevention of COVID, when the actual randomized trials were done, most of those drugs turned out not to have any impact whatsoever, either on mortality or on progression of disease. So you must always, of course, start with a basis which is based on some, rationale. You have to have a scientific rationale to test something. But once you have that, you need to be able to undertake those kind of studies, and there is huge potential in India. And I know that the ICMR itself has been involved in the past in several studies of Ayurvedic interventions for diseases like diabetes, as well as for anal fissure, and more recently for dengue. And once an intervention is proved to be successful, then it makes it much more easier to scale it up and also there is much more enthusiasm behind scaling up something for which there's clear evidence. So there is, of course, historical knowledge that the traditional systems have, which has come down through generations. But now that you also have other systems of medicine, the allopathic system of medicine, which may or may not be offering some um, interventions for the same disease, it will be important to do sometimes maybe even comparative studies to see which one is better in a certain condition or situation. And always we have to keep in mind that there will be situations where one would be preferable to the other, or there could be situations where both could be used. Allopathic and Ayurveda could be used in a complementary to have a synergistic effect. So we know also that I would like to remind everyone that a few months ago, the WHO's Director General, Tedros, announced, along with the Prime Minister, Sri Narendra Modi, the creation and the establishment of a global center for traditional medicine in India. We are very, very happy that such a center in India would provide the opportunity for people and researchers, not just in India, but globally, who are interested in traditional medicine, to really collaborate, to work together, both in the generation of evidence, in the generation of normative and standard setting products, frameworks for the assessment of such traditional medicine products, research protocols, but also the synthesis of evidence that can then feed into policy making. So I think this is a huge impetus for traditional medicine for the world, and the establishment of such center in India will really give a boost to traditional medicine, particularly in Asia. Um, it is the responsibility of the global community to see that there is appropriate use of traditional medicine, and it is also a responsibility of the stakeholders. So we need the right kind of research, the right kind of clinical practice. We need to study and report on the benefits and the safety concerns, appropriate communications, the impartial assessment of impact, which has to be free of all conflicts of interest, appropriate policies, and of course, the strengthening of human resources and infrastructure. All of these are absolutely key to attaining the goal of the full utilization of the potential of traditional medicine, including Ayurveda. So it would be really important for this community to really take the lead, to embrace all of these desirable elements that can then work together to really make the field of Ayurveda even stronger, the evidence base even stronger, at the same time building the capacity, building the human resources. And I would like to assure everyone that the World Health Organization is committed to working with traditional medicine, Ayurveda practitioners, and research institutes. Particularly, I would like to commend the Ministry of Ayush for taking up this responsibility of the Global Center, and the WHO look forward to working together jointly to make it a success. Thank you very much, Namaskar.